I woke up to the sound of distant chatter and the hum of traffic that was far too loud for a quiet rural morning. As I padded to the kitchen window, my eyes widened in disbelief. There, right outside my farmhouse, where I had proudly set up my little farm stand each season to sell fresh produce and homemade goods, an imposing no trespassing sign now stood. The notice was emblazoned with official lettering and stamped with the HOA's seal, a final, crushing blow. Karen had banned my farm stand from my own property. For months, I'd poured my heart into growing the best heirloom tomatoes, crisp lettuce, and sweet berries this county had ever seen. My stand wasn't just a business. It was an expression of my life's work, a celebration of sustainable living and local produce. But apparently, to Karen, ever the self-appointed enforcer of community standards, the vibrant displays of color and flavor were a nuisance. It wasn't long ago that she had even complained about the way my bright, cheerful signage clashed with the muted tones of our neighborhood. Now, with a fine levied against me and my stand forcibly removed, I realized that my right to operate on my own land was being trampled by her petty interpretations of the rules. In that heated moment, a spark of rebellious inspiration ignited within me. If Karen was going to ban my farm stand, then I'd do something even she could never imagine. A bold counterstroke that would not only reclaim my livelihood, but also send a resounding message about personal freedom and community power. I recalled how Karen prided herself on her refined tastes and insisted on shopping only at the local grocery store, a store she frequented religiously, convinced that its pristine aisles and carefully curated selection were the pinnacle of suburban living. And that's when it hit me. If she could dictate what belonged on her streets, I could take control of the very place she worshipped. I began to hatch a plan that was as audacious as it was calculated. I would buy the grocery store where Karen shopped, a store that, until now, had been the darling of the neighborhood and a symbol of conformity. By turning that store into my own enterprise, I would reclaim my right to do business on my property while giving the community a taste of sweet, fresh justice. The idea of a grocery store takeover, complete with banners proclaiming fresh produce, fresh freedom, made my heart pound with excitement. Karen's carefully ordered world was about to be shaken at its very core. I could already picture the look on her face when she discovered that the very institution she championed was now in my hands. The irony was delicious. A woman so devoted to enforcing rules would soon have to contend with the unexpected consequences of my bold action. As I sat there, envisioning the chaos and the community's uproar, I knew that this wasn't merely about a farm stand. It was about standing up to an overzealous enforcer who believed that her version of order was the only acceptable one. Today, Karen's reign over the minutiae of our community would be challenged in a way that would be impossible to ignore. Crescent Meadows was a picturesque, gated community known for its meticulously manicured lawns, identical houses, and a near-obsessive commitment to uniformity. Every resident was expected to conform to a strict set of rules, enforced rigorously by the local homeowners association, HOA. In this carefully curated environment, even the smallest hint of individuality was seen as a disruption to the established order. At the helm of this rigid system was Karen Miller, known throughout Crescent Meadows as HOA Karen. In her early 50s and always dressed in crisp, conservative attire, Karen carried a clipboard and a smartphone like weapons in her constant battle for perfection. Her days were spent patrolling the neighborhood, scrutinizing every curb, every hedge, and every decorative element with a hawk's eye for detail. To her, any display of creativity, a bright sign, an unusual sculpture, or even a splash of unexpected color, was a threat to the uniform aesthetic that she believed was essential for community order. She was a force to be reckoned with, and her word was final when it came to what was acceptable in Crescent Meadows. I, on the other hand, had always been a nonconformist. Though I had grown up in Crescent Meadows, I had inherited a sprawling plot on the outskirts where I established my farm stand. My little enterprise was a labor of love, a vibrant showcase of the best fruits, vegetables, and homemade preserves that my land could offer. Unlike the cookie-cutter homes that lined the community streets, My property was a colorful tapestry of nature and creativity. I believe that the beauty of life lay in diversity, in the ability to express oneself freely, and in the organic rhythms of working the land. Over the years, my farm stand had become a local favorite. Neighbors appreciated the fresh produce and the friendly, down-to-earth atmosphere. It was more than just a market. It was a celebration of local heritage, a rebellion against the soulless uniformity of the rest of the community. Yet, my success and individuality had long been a thorn in Karen's side. She had repeatedly fined me for unauthorized modifications to my property, for using colors and styles that deviated from the HOA's prescribed norms. Each fine was a reminder that, in Crescent Meadows, even the most heartfelt expressions of creativity were subject to bureaucratic scrutiny. Then came the fateful day when Karen took her vendetta to a new level by banning my farm stand altogether. Without any notice or consent, she declared that my vibrant displays were a violation of community aesthetics, and that my land was no longer fit for such unsightly endeavors. The notice was harsh, backed by the full weight of the HOA's draconian rules, and it left me feeling both betrayed and determined. If Karen could silence my farm stand, then I'd have to fight back in the only way I knew how, by taking control of the very institution she so revered. The grocery store at the heart of Crescent Meadows was a pristine, upscale establishment where Karen shopped religiously. Its polished floors, bright displays, and carefully curated selection were the epitome of suburban refinement, a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble charm of my farm stand. Karen's unwavering loyalty to that store was well known, and it was a cornerstone of her identity. By acquiring that grocery store, I would not only reclaim my right to operate freely on my property, but also upend the very system Karen depended on to enforce her narrow view of perfection. In this divided community, my battle was more than just a personal grievance. It was a stand for all those who believe that creativity, individuality, and local heritage should be celebrated rather than suppressed by an overzealous HOA. As I prepared to launch my bold countermeasure, I could sense that a turning point was near, a moment when the community's true values would be revealed and the chains of conformity would finally be broken. The conflict ignited in the wake of Karen's unilateral decision to ban my farm stand. It all began with the arrival of a neatly printed notice posted on my barn door, an official-looking document stating that my farm stand was in violation of community guidelines and would be permanently closed. The fine was steep, and the language was rigidly bureaucratic, leaving no room for appeal. For me, it was the final straw, a deliberate, crushing blow to my right to express my creativity and share the fruits of my labor with the community. I quickly gathered evidence of my compliant operations over the years. Receipts for organic fertilizers, photos of my flourishing produce, and testimonials from loyal customers who frequented my stand. Every piece of documentation stood as a testament to the legitimacy of my business. I then turned my attention to Karen's latest move. A quick scan of the community forum revealed heated debates. Many residents were outraged by the arbitrary fine, accusing Karen of overstepping her bounds and suppressing local entrepreneurship. The digital conversation was ablaze with hashtags like #FarmStandFreedom and #NoMoreKaren, and a growing chorus of voices demanded that the HOA board reconsider its draconian measures. Fueled by both indignation and a fierce sense of justice, I began to devise my counterattack. I knew that if Karen believed she could simply silence my enterprise, I had to take a stand that would be impossible to ignore. I started by researching local business regulations and property laws. To my relief and satisfaction, I discovered that as the rightful owner of my land, and as someone who had long operated within the bounds of legal guidelines, I had every right to sell my produce and even modify the use of my property as I saw fit. There was no legal basis for Karen's fine, and this knowledge galvanized me to act. Then, an idea sparked. If Karen was so infatuated with the grocery store where she shopped, I would buy it. I began contacting local business brokers, scouring listings, and meeting with store owners in hushed meetings to discuss a potential acquisition. The plan was audacious, By taking over the very store that was the cornerstone of Karen's identity, I would not only reclaim my economic freedom, but also disrupt the rigid power structure that had enabled her to impose fines on my farm stand. The more I planned, the more the details fell into place. I arranged meetings with financial advisors and legal experts to ensure that the purchase would be seamless and, most importantly, public. I wanted the community to know that I wasn't acting out of mere spite. I was standing up for our collective right to live, work, and express ourselves freely. Every fine Karen had imposed on me was a symbol of the broader suppression of individuality in our community. And by acquiring the grocery store, I would send a clear message. The power to enforce conformity would no longer be concentrated in the hands of one overzealous enforcer. As the digital dossier of my evidence grew, so did the support from neighbors. Messages flooded in, recounting stories of similar grievances, of local businesses being squeezed by arbitrary fines and residents being forced to conform to an outdated vision of perfection. My online updates, filled with photos of my thriving produce stand, behind-the-scenes videos of my planning sessions, and screenshots of supportive social media posts, became a rallying point. The hashtag buy this store quickly trended, and within days, I had secured the preliminary agreements needed to move forward with the purchase. But Karen wasn't going to take this lying down. Rumors began to swirl that she was preparing to file yet another complaint, this time to halt my acquisition of the grocery store. The tension was palpable. I received calls from concerned neighbors, and the local community forum was awash with discussions about the potential showdown between Karen's authoritarian methods and the rising tide of grassroots resistance. Late one chilly evening, as I reviewed my financial documents and double-checked my legal filings, I received a notification from the HOA board, a summons to a special meeting to discuss the matter. The board was clearly rattled by the mounting evidence and the community's growing support for my cause. In that moment, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. Karen's fine, her petty suppression of my farm stand, and her attempts to dictate community standards were about to be challenged in the most public way possible. I spent the next few days preparing for the meeting, organizing every shred of digital evidence, refining my arguments, and reaching out to fellow residents to ensure they would attend. My determination was fueled by the knowledge that this was not merely a personal battle. It was a fight for the future of our community, a fight for the right to innovate and express oneself without arbitrary interference. And with every passing hour, the plan to buy the grocery store, and thus to wrest control of the very symbol of Karen's authority, grew bolder and more inevitable. As word of my audacious plan spread throughout Crescent Meadows, the digital reaction was explosive. Social media platforms were flooded with posts, comments, and hashtags supporting my stand against the oppressive measures imposed by HOA Karen. Videos and photos of my bustling farm stand, along with screenshots of Karen's fines and threatening messages, were shared widely. Hashtags like hashtag #FarmStandFreedom, hashtag #NoMoreKaren, and hashtag #BuyThisStore trended locally, and the momentum was unmistakable. Residents, long frustrated by arbitrary fines and stifled creativity, began to see my struggle as a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope that one could stand up against bureaucratic tyranny. Local news outlets soon caught wind of the unfolding drama. Reporters arrived in Crescent Meadows, capturing the scene outside my property and interviewing neighbors who expressed both disbelief and admiration for my actions. It's incredible to see a farmer take such a bold stand against an overzealous HOA. One anchor remarked during a live segment, his tone a mixture of awe and support. The narrative quickly shifted from a personal vendetta to a broader movement for property rights and the defense of individual expression. Inside the HOA board, divisions that had long simmered beneath the surface exploded into open conflict. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and leaked minutes revealed a sharp rift among board members. Some staunchly defended Karen's actions, arguing that strict adherence to community rules was essential for maintaining property values. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the public outcry, argued that Karen's fines were a blatant abuse of power that needed to be curbed. We must protect the rights of our residents, not suppress their creativity with arbitrary sanctions. One board member was overheard saying. The internal turmoil only added fuel to the fire, and it soon became clear that the board's authority was waning. I continued to update my digital dossier, posting live streams and detailed blog entries that documented every development, from the initial ban on my farm stand to the gathering support for my plan to buy the grocery store. My online updates were met with an outpouring of support. Neighbors recounted their own stories of fines and arbitrary restrictions, and digital petitions demanding reform of the HOA's policies swelled to thousands of signatures. The collective voice of Crescent Meadows was now a force that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Karen Miller was scrambling to defend her actions. In a series of hastily recorded videos posted on her social media accounts, she insisted that her fines were necessary to maintain community order. "I am only protecting our standards," she declared, her voice trembling with both anger and desperation. But every attempt to justify her actions was met with a tidal wave of digital evidence that refuted her claims. Videos of my thriving, colorful farm stand and the passionate outpouring of support from residents painted a picture of a community ready to embrace creativity and independence. As the tension escalated, the final public hearing was scheduled, a moment that promised to be the turning point in the battle for property rights in Crescent Meadows. In the days leading up to the hearing, I held small gatherings with supportive neighbors, distributed flyers, and encouraged everyone to bring their stories and their passion for change. The air was thick with anticipation, and every shared video clip, every hashtag, every comment on the community forum reinforced the message. If the HOA board did not act, then the oppressive legacy of Karen's fines and arbitrary restrictions would continue unchecked. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived at the community center to find it packed with residents. Signs bearing slogans like "Our Land, Our Rights," and "Creativity over Conformity" filled the hallways. The energy was palpable, a mixture of excitement, determination, and the unwavering belief that our community deserved better. The digital dossier I had painstakingly compiled was displayed on large screens for all to see, each piece of evidence a testament to the absurdity of Karen's actions and the righteousness of our cause. The final moments before the hearing were charged with emotion. Every face in the crowd reflected the shared frustration of years spent under the oppressive rule of an overzealous enforcer, and the collective demand for a future where individual property rights and creative freedom were not just tolerated but celebrated. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a moment when the power dynamics in Crescent Meadows would be forever altered. The decisive moment arrived on a brisk, clear morning in a packed boardroom at the Crescent Meadows Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the future of our community's enforcement policies. With an unwavering presence, Councilwoman Melissa Carter stepped up to the podium, her eyes blazing with the hope and resolve of a community that had long been silenced. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed records of fines and complaints, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Carter began, her voice steady and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her decision to ban my farm stand and orchestrate an unauthorized event on private property, were not rooted in any legitimate concern for community aesthetics or safety, but were driven by personal bias and a flagrant abuse of power. Our community's fundamental rights to express ourselves and to manage our own property must be upheld. A heavy silence fell over the room as Carter continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to these actions, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such an overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines to ensure that every resident's right to innovate and to conduct their own business is protected. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary fine. It is a resounding declaration that Crescent Meadows will no longer tolerate the imposition of personal vendettas on private property. Her words resonated deeply, and murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a respected community advocate, known for his tireless defense of property rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have their ability to live and work freely compromised by the petty whims of an overzealous enforcer. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values innovation, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a collective call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local Business Oversight Office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents confirming that my farm stand was legally operated and that Karen's fines were unjust. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only had my stand operated within all legal parameters, but my subsequent decision to purchase the grocery store was a lawful exercise of my property rights. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible for the arbitrary fines, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Carter concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Crescent Meadows, a community where every resident's rights are respected, where public authority is exercised with fairness, and where creativity and innovation are celebrated rather than stifled." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live and work without arbitrary interference. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and creative freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Crescent Meadows. The days of petty fines and personal vendettas were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Crescent Meadows underwent a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent discussions about property rights, creative freedom, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Crescent Meadows" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the decisive action taken to safeguard every resident's right to operate their business and express their individuality without fear of punitive measures. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA, and #ArtIsFreedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and envision a future where local creativity was not only tolerated but celebrated. Neighbors who had long lived under the oppressive grip of the HOA's stringent rules now spoke proudly about their right to manage their own property and pursue innovative ventures. "Our land is our legacy, and we must protect it at all costs," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing throughout the crowded room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Crescent Meadows would always honor the creative spirit of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focusing on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was thoroughly scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or undue interference. Our duty is to protect the rights and freedoms of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of creative freedom. When we stand together, our voices can reshape our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for a more inclusive and equitable governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's arbitrary fines and to reclaim my farm stand, by taking control of the very institution she worshipped, had not only restored my rights, but had ignited a movement that resonated far beyond my own property. Neighbors who had once been silenced by fear of retribution now found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance, uniting in a common cause. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's misdeeds became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to pursue one's passion without interference. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Crescent Meadows, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative entrepreneur in our community, Councilwoman Carter proclaimed, her voice resonating with unwavering determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Crescent Meadows, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's overreach, banning my cherished farm stand, was met with a bold counterattack that culminated in my purchase of the local grocery store became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in individual rights and creative freedom. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Crescent Meadows, truth, justice, and the right to innovate would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Crescent Meadows would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression were cherished above all else.